Hi, I'm Mosiejczuk. I'm going to talk about the care and feeding of OpenBSD porters. No, it's not just going to be a slide showing beer or cheese. Quick introduction. I'm a systems administrator for the RIT Software Engineering Department. I've been using Unix since 1990. My first BSDs were 4.3 and 4.3 Tahoe, also in 1990. Started using OpenBSD about 2.9. It's a little fuzzy. It was definitely at least a release before PF came out. I started doing serious porting in November 2018, and then I joined the OpenBSD project in April of this year. I'm planning on talking about some misconceptions about porting from people outside the project, what an ideal update looks like, some of the realities of porting for OpenBSD, getting your work noticed, some tips for that, and tools to use for porting, and some other resources. Some quick terms. Porters will talk about consumers. Consumers are the ports that depend on the port you're working on. It's a magical term when you say there are no consumers. That's kind of like an ideal if you're a new porter, because you're not going to break anything else if your update doesn't work right other than the thing itself. We'll talk about bulk builds sometimes, putting through bulk builds. Your thing messed up the bulk build. It's just when, on a particular architecture, somebody builds all the ports. Current, running a snapshot, or compiling it yourself from the current tree. Stable is the current release with security updates. Wife asked me to put in linkers. Linker is the part of the compiler that turn the object code into the final executable. We'll talk about, I may mention build, run, lib, and test depends. Those are the different varieties of dependencies for a port in terms of, Brian explained this well in his thing if you were there. Build depends are the things that need to be there when you build the port but otherwise don't. Run depends are, they need to be there to run it. Lib depends are basically like run depends, except they're just shared libraries. Test depends only need to be installed when you're doing regression testing of a port, which I do a lot of. And if we talk about arches or whatever, we're talking CPU architectures. AMD 64, i386, Spark 64, ARM 64, MIPS, so on. Some misconceptions we'll run through. Everybody thinks porting something new is the best way to start doing ports. That porters are being really picky and just pedantic when we say, please do your port updates on current. There's often a view that only porters can review ports that are sent to the list. A lot of people think maintainer is a prestige status. Like, if we collect them all, I will win OpenBSD ports. And one is, OpenBSD porters are just jerks who ignore me on purpose. Porting something new. A lot of people think the very best thing I could do for the OpenBSD project is port this new software that they don't have that I use. It's useful. It's not super useful. There are hundreds. Actually, if I checked after I wrote this, there's actually over 1,000 ports that could use an update for various reasons. Porting new stuff is good. Updating, maintaining, and or removing old, crusty, obsolete stuff is better. The idea that porting on current isn't important, it's something I thought way back when, before I started doing serious porting, I submitted the occasional patch, and they'd be like, you really should do it against current, and I'm like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. It's actually important. The ports infrastructure changes constantly. We constantly improve our tools. I implemented a modpy PyTest target because there was, in a whole bunch of Python ports, this boilerplate that everybody did slightly differently. their own unique snowflake to run tests that use PyTest, that may or may not have the right environment variables, that might work for this port, certain ones might fail, and it's just a bunch of boilerplate. So we got rid of all that, and I created this mod PyTest that you can just set to yes, and it does the right thing. We just recently went through, we used to have permit package CD-ROM and permit package FTP, because for many years OpenBSD did CD releases. Well, those stopped after 6.0. Because there are some things that we could distribute as a package on a CD, and then there are some things that we could distribute via FTP online, but pressing it onto a CD that's sold for money was a no-no. We don't do that anymore. The difference doesn't matter, so we got rid of it. And we moved all the ports during this, this current cycle between 6.5 and the upcoming 6.6 over to just permit package. We add new make targets to make things easier. It just keeps changing, and a lot of times it's to eliminate things like boilerplate, to cut down on the amount of trivia you need to know to work in the ports tree, or the amount of stuff you have to look up. So if you submit a new port or an updated port from stable, we basically have to port your port to current. So that's why we often say, please do it on current, please do it on current, please do it on current. Also, stable doesn't get updates. Somebody might have already updated the port that you're trying to update if you're looking at the stable tree. Our next misconception, only porters can review ports. Only myself or Brian, or I think we're the only ones here, right? Only one of the devs on the list, you know, they're the only ones who can speak up and say, this is good, no, you missed something or whatever. I actually put on social media at one point, I was like, if you want to befriend a tester, test their shit. And if I needed to do this talk in one slide, that's what it would say, is just test our shit. There's thousands of ports. It needs testing. Even something like just this worked for me or this exploded horribly and does not work is helpful for the porters. It gives needed feedback to people who are submitting stuff. It also helps tell busy porters, if I've only got a limited amount of time, but I want to review somebody's port, maybe commit it. If I see Michael and Alan and a couple other people have all said, I tested this and it works great, I'll probably look at that one first, because it's very unlikely to be a waste of my time if one or more people have tested it and says it works great. Or if it says this blows up, I'll probably move on, or at least it'll save me some time in giving feedback. Reviewing them also exposes you to more ports knowledge. You can see what other people are doing. Don't be a jerk, though. There's this common perception that OpenBSD developers are just all bomb-throwing jerks. Most of the people you see on the list doing that aren't OpenBSD devs. I'm always impressed with Stuart Henderson, where there will be somebody who's like really deserves blowing up at. They come in like, you guys are all idiots, you're not updating anything. He's unflinchingly polite and will educate you. The idea that maintainer is like a prestige status. Ports are not Pokemon or comic books or baseball cards. There's no award for maintaining a whole bunch. Signing yourself up as maintainer is a promise. You'll be a point of contact for that port, and you're expected to respond. If you're not going to do that, you are an obstacle to getting that port updated. Because we won't just commit it without giving the maintainer a chance to say something. So generally that's at least a week, maybe 2. So, you know, especially new folks coming in, They're like, I really need this. I'd like to do the update. They send it to ports and CC the maintainer or send it to the maintainer directly and they never get a response. It's discouraging. We actually went through a big purge recently of inactive maintainers. Dan J went through and emailed all the maintainers to say, do you still want to update this, yes or no? Gave them weeks. If they didn't answer, we took them off. Many went, I haven't used that in years, please take my name off. Other people said, no, I'd like to see it. So it's a promise to the community that you'll take care of that thing. So putting your name on it is something you should only do if you're actually going to follow through. Onto the porters are jerks who ignore you on purpose. Like we just delight in, reviewing your emails and cackling and saying, you'll never get any feedback. There are 10,715 packages for AMD 64 and snapshots. I checked this morning. There aren't even 100 OpenBSD porters. There's probably not even 50, but I'm not positive. Some of the porters do those bulk builds on top of maintaining their own ports and doing work in other areas of the tree. Generally, we do have day jobs in a non-OpenBSD life too, so there's only so much time and attention to spare. So if you don't get feedback, yeah, it happens to me too. You end up having to, we say, sending pings. You wait at least a week, you send a ping. I make it a point in my ports work to try and review, at least for Python, other people's stuff. There was only a couple of people who do Python ports, or who are, there are more than that, but there are only a couple of people who are considered Python porters or consider themselves Python porters who would review other people's stuff. So I've kind of made it a point to go into that space and learn it, to try and get things more up to date and to let people help us update things. So it's never malicious ignoring. If you watch, you'll even see other developers going like, hello? Did anybody see this? The ideal update, it brings the software up to date, it breaks nothing else in ports, it builds on every single architecture we have, it just works in the bulk builds, no hand-holding, it also gets everybody a pony. We can probably do the first 4 most of the time, and that's what we shoot for. I put in the pony line, my wife reviewed it, she said it's the best talk ever, it has ponies. Some of the realities of the port system, like I said, there are too many ports and there are too few porters. There's actually even more ports than those 10,000 packages imply, because there are a number of them that can't be distributed as packages. One really useful one is the Unify software. If you have Ubiquity stuff, you can actually run the control software on OpenBSD. But you can't redistribute their stuff, so you have to go into the ports tree and build it yourself. So there's too many ports, too few porters. There's always too much work to be done. We do keep changing things. And one part of the ethos of OpenBSD is it's supposed to be something we enjoy doing. We had a lot of emails too. We're supposed to watch multiple lists. There are other channels we're supposed to watch. You might just get missed. I might even see your port and say, I should review that later today, and then it goes off the top of my email. I do try to double back sometimes, but again, that's part of why people are like, oh, God, they don't want any updates, they just ignore me. And you fired it off to the list once and, for Python ports, say I was at this conference for a couple days, Stuart Henderson was on vacation and Dan J was busy with his day job. Nobody looks at your thing. If you only send it the once, yeah, it might not ever be looked at again. But that's also why reviewing other people's ports is good. I actually started doing that before I became an actual dev. I'd learned enough and I'd go through and I'd be like, actually, this thing you did doesn't work, you need to change this and this. And that can get someone like me to go, let's look at that one. This one works. So how best can you get your work noticed? In your email, tell us what you changed, what you tested, the impact on any consumers, a copy in the parts of the changelog or a link to it so we know what's changing in the software. You know, if you can show us that the changelog says like, change the license, tweak the comments, it's a lot less likely to blow everything up and not need as close a review. Bonus points for telling us what architectures you test on, which for most of you, probably AMD 64. That's what I work on first. I even have a Spark 64 I'll check on, but the fastest machines tend to be AMD 64. Say that. If you did test it on others, bonus. I mean, honestly, if you have it working on AMD 64 and Spark 64, it's very unlikely you did it wrong. You can still do it, I have faith. Make it easy for others to review your work. You've got people who are way too busy, have way too little time. Give us everything we need to like review it all at once. When you ping a port, give us a fresh copy of your diff. If the port changed because we did something like the permit package CD-ROM to permit package change, regenerate it against the current thing so it just applies cleanly. Every like speed bump you give for somebody reviewing your port or them having to guess what you did, it's quite likely like after a minute or two of trying to puzzle it out, we'll go, I'm gonna work on something else. If you do consistent, solid work, it gets noticed. You keep doing good work, I'll recognize your name and I'll be like, you know, Shirk submitted another port. He's been doing great work. Let's get that in there. We want to encourage that. There's some porter anti-patterns. The vague person. This changes it from 1.1 to 3.7. And you've jumped, you know, multiple major versions. We don't know what it changed. You didn't say you tested anything. That's like, you know, a box on our doorstep that's ticking loudly. Being a fire hose, we do have limited attention. Make sure you go for quantity or quality over quantity. Both is great. Do realize that if you have too many all at once, you may not get answers. People might just be intimidated by the wall of port update. But if you don't do quality work, Firehose is bad. You'll start getting ignored, even if you start doing better work. Be honest. Don't say, there are no consumers, when there are 20 consumers, and you just didn't test it. Don't say that you tested all 20 consumers if you only tested 10 of them. You may not be able to test all of them. Say that. If the tests are broken, regression tests, say the tests are broken. Don't say like, yep, everything worked great. I also tested on Spark 64, and I even resurrected the old Spark 32-bit thing and tested it on there, and now just be honest. Don't be a bomb thrower. If you get ignored, don't start coming in and being like, you guys all suck, no wonder you suck, and you know, you're not taking my update for the latest version because you guys don't actually care about security. Yeah, we get those people, and then they start showing up on forums that are like, everybody ignores every single one of my emails. And it's like, it's a mystery. You know, after the 5th time you came on and insulted all of the porters, I don't know how you ended up in their kill file. It'd just be one of those coincidences on the internet. Malware, that's what it was. Like I said, here's some tips. Always be honest. Take critique well. Yeah, we might be like, yeah, you know, you didn't do this, you didn't test any of this, please do that. Sometimes it feels like rebuke. Busy people tend to be brief. And honest, good faith feedback sometimes feels like, idiot! Unless we use the word idiot, and then honestly, ignore it. Take the critique well. I mean, getting feedback is better than being ignored. Internalize the stuff that people tell you. If you keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, despite feedback, that's another good way to get ignored. I've found it helpful to make checklists of things that you forget that you can go through. Because, yeah, it's embarrassing when you forget for the third time the stupid, simple thing that you just forgot. Because you're trying to remember 12 things and you remembered 11. Take learning OpenBSD porting slow. You're not going to learn everything at once. There's so much trivia depending on what you're doing. We try to minimize it, but there's a lot. The OpenBSD Porter's Handbook. It's part of the FAQ. I find it intimidating. It is incomplete in places. It is a good reference, generally. It can always be improved because ports keeps changing. I need to go back through and review it more. At first, when I looked at doing porting, they were like, well, we have documentation, look at the Porter's Handbook. And I looked at it, and it's kind of like the equivalent of somebody pulling out one of those massive books that goes boom as you drop it on the desk. And it's like, but I just wanted to do it little. So it's good. Don't think you need to comprehend all of it to start working on ports. Speaking of which, how would one choose a port to update as opposed to a new one? portroach.openbsd.org. It tracks out-of-date ports. It lists them by maintainer. That's where I found out that there's like 1,500 total that are out of date. Some of those are out of date with good reason. It's like, yes, there's a newer version that breaks every single thing that touches it. Particular look at the ports that are maintained by the OpenBSD ports mailing list. And now I'm seeing especially that when I drop the resolution ever so much to make it fit nicely on the screen, it's kind of, if there's no maintainer listed, the email address ends up being ports@openbsd, and that is the maintainer listed on PortRoach. There are ports without a listed maintainer, so basically you don't have to worry about if somebody's going to be responsive or not, or if they're protective of the port, because if they're really protective of the port, they'd put their name on maintainer. As you start, try being okay with abandoning a port. I had a couple false starts with seriously doing ports. I was like, hey, look, CD Paranoia updates. Lots of screaming. CD Paranoia port is basically a rewrite of all of the SCSI bits of CD Paranoia. So the idea of porting, updating to the latest 10 dot whatever that's many years old, I made an honest try at it, but oh God. And then I was like, okay. There's this little utility called WorkRave that has you take breaks and stuff. And I was like, I used that in the past. I could update that. That shouldn't be too hard. More screaming. You're learning. If you pick something that's too hard or too complicated, come back later. Find something easier. If you're on PortRoach, the tip I'll give it to people sometimes, if you see the version we have in ports is 1.0.5, and the newest version is 1.0.6, that's probably a pretty easy update. They probably did not flip the table over doing the minorest of minor point releases. It's a good starting port update. Porting tools. There's a lot of stuff in user ports infrastructure. Basically, all the stuff that runs the ports is in there. Two utilities in user ports infrastructure bin are PortCheck and PortGen. PortCheck is kind of a linter for ports. It's not 100% comprehensive. We try and fix it when we can. But if it gives you feedback about something, fix it. PortGen is a tool that was originally a Google Summer of Code thing. It's got backends for PyPy, CPAN, and the Ruby gems stuff. You can say like PortGen Py, and then the name of something on PyPy. It will go out, pull the metadata, and try and do most of the work for you. It will actually even do it recursively, which is both magical and sometimes horrifying when you're like, why are you on number 12 when you haven't finished number 1? Because it'll go like, oh, I'm trying to do A, but it needs B. B is not ported. I'm trying to do B. C is not ported. I'll do C. Yeah. But more often than not, it's pretty magical. It can actually also generate updated ports. If it sees that the port already exists, it'll generate an updated one and base it on that makefile instead of just the makefile.template. I actually disagree with Brian with walking people through makefile.template because that has like so many options that you just have to explain. Sorry. I found it intimidating. I was like, and whereas like 80% of them you don't care about. There are a couple other files in there. There's an mk.conf.template. That is something actually that's probably better either copied into or included in your Etsy mk.conf. It poisons various misspellings for the make system. So if you misspell something, it dies and tells you instead of, I came upon recently that was separate build, but separate was misspelled. And so it didn't actually do a separate build. So when I updated, I just took that out since everybody liked it the way it was that didn't work. There's an rc.template file in there. If you're porting a daemon, that is a very useful file for generating an rc.d file for OpenBSD. Some more tools. I use Dan J's OBSD ports tools to start. I use showvictims.py all the time. You could just, there's SQL ports, which provides a SQLite database of all the information of the various ports. Showvictims just provides an easy, like, query it and spit out the things that depend on this. Basically, the ports you'll victimize if you break the current update. It gives me a list of all the things I want to regression test for the new port. He has a KShell-RC that has many aliases and shell functions. I just created a repository of my ports tools that I rewrote some of his aliases to be names that I liked better. It's got various, my mk.conf and other things that you can feel free to use. I commented the things that I felt were non-obvious. A good porting tool is mark.info. Before you do an update, do a search on the port name in the OpenBSD-ports archive. Somebody might have actually sent out an update a couple months ago that didn't get noticed. Rather than do that work, you can go check out theirs and provide feedback on it. It's also worth checking OpenBSD-ports-CBS to make sure it didn't just get committed shortly after you thought about doing it. It's never a fun feeling to do a bunch of hard work on a port and then be like, and somebody else got there first. I concentrate on Python ports. Python is a special child in ports. We've got the whole Python 2.7 and 3.x, which 2.7 is going out of support shortly, but there's still a lot of things that depend on it. So there's a lot of infrastructure in the lang/Python module. You can see port modules for more information. We have our own special like modpy egg version, modpy setup tools. I added the modpy PyTest. There's more. The best way to learn it, look at other Python ports. Start with those easy ones, look at them. If you have a Python port, and you send it to the list, I'll often review it. If you want feedback before you send it to the list in general, go ahead and send it to me. I'll take a look at it. Okay. Went through that a little quicker than I thought. Anybody have any questions I can answer? As a high school teacher of mine said, he'd go questions, comments, cheap shots. Yes, sir. Okay. If it doesn't have a maintainer, it doesn't mean it's unmaintained. It doesn't have somebody who said, I will make sure this is up to date. Honestly, I only have taken maintainer on a handful of ports, partially because there's so many that need updating that I figure I'll keep like ranging through for a while, and partially also because I targeted really easy things to start and kind of like worked to more complicated as I went. You know, especially after those first two that involved lots of screaming. I would try a port, see if it was an easy update. If it was at all complicated and not the simplest thing ever, I'd be like, next. It's just, over the months, what counts as simple for me and fairly easy and not complicated has grown. So I figured if I put my name as maintainer on all of those, it's kind of like, screw you, newbies. I'm pulling up the ladder after me. But so just because it's maintained by the ports list doesn't mean it's unmaintained. You can actually look in CVS Web and you'll often see a lot of times some of these, there's basically a maintainer who hasn't put their name on it. They'll periodically go in and update it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's almost half the ports.
Yeah, well, especially we increased the number, and we actually did that so that we can point people to Port Roach and look at those, because if you look at Port Roach, you look at the maintainer, especially if you don't realize that that doesn't mean unmaintained, you might think you're stepping on somebody else's turf if you go in and update this other port, which you could be. But if you check and see they haven't updated it for 3 years, feel free to send an update to the list and CC them. But so we got rid of a lot of the inactive maintainers so that people who want to work on OpenBSD have a bigger choice to look at. Yeah, just it being maintained by that doesn't mean it's abandoned. Occasionally it does. Brian termed me pie killer recently because I went through and I found 30, 35 old Python ports that there was one that had been imported in 2002 and hadn't had a newer version since. Just all the activity was like moving it to the newer versions of the ports infrastructure. And I was like, yeah, how about we kill those? So Brian termed me Kurt Pie Killer Mosiejczuk that day. Any questions? Any other questions? I mean, thanks to Pamela, who's who's my wife, who sat down and showed me how to do a Python port update. I had compiled my own software for a lot of years, a long time ago. Basically, the only thing I didn't have was like how the port system worked. I'd kind of done the occasional update without like understanding it. It was like, I understand this hieroglyphic, it means 3.7. Let's change it to this one that means 3.8. So she showed me how to do a Python port, and we did a couple together, and then I just took off running. She was a little like, hey. Wanted to thank Stuart Henderson for all the valuable knowledge and advice. Stuart Henderson knows, like, one of the things when I joined the project, everybody's like, if Stuart Henderson says it's true, it's true. If he gives you feedback on a port, take it. If he explains something, take it. He's right. Almost always. I wanted to thank Florian Obser, Peter Hessler, and Andrew Fresh for lots of support and advice before and after I joined the project. And I wanted to thank VBSDCon and the sponsors for bringing me here. I was really looking forward to this talk, and hopefully it went well. All right.